In this first section, we're going to look at populations and samples and how we get those. At its simplest, the population is who you want to study. It's who you want to know about, and a sample is just part of that, a small group of that. Now, typically we're going to do it randomly, so it might look more like this diagram here, where we have a big population we want to study, and the sample is little pockets here and there that we are grabbing using some random technique. If we think about doing a study of the United States, you could imagine that the United States, all of the people in the United States, is the population. So every one of the 300+ million Americans is part of that population. The sample then is the people that we randomly call up. Let's say we randomly call 50 people for our study. Those 50 people would make up the sample. Populations are what we want. Samples are shortcuts. However, those shortcuts are actually necessary. We can't really ask every person in a very large population certain types of questions very easily, so we need to do samples. As a quick example, let's imagine that your population that you're studying is students on one of the robotics teams, and let's say it's a team with 12 students, and the question you ask them, the variable is, are you the oldest sibling? So imagine I walked up to these 12 students and asked each of them, are you the oldest sibling? And their two choices are either yes or no. So the first one said yes. The second one said yes, I'm the oldest sibling. The third one said, no, I have an older brother or sister, so I am not the oldest sibling, and so forth. And you ask each person to answer those questions. Instead of asking everyone, which you could do, you could ask the entire team. Instead, what if you only asked a random sample of 4 people? And that random sample gave you a yes, a no, and a no. So that would be 50%. The proportion, 0.5 or 50%, is the percentage that said yes in this case. What if you did another random sample though? This time you ended up with a no, a no, a no, and a yes. So you got a different answer. You got a proportion of 25% or 0.25. And if you did it again, maybe you'd get 3 yeses and a no. The point is that every time you do a sample, the answer might come out differently. So we have to figure out how we deal with that. Again, populations are what we want. We want to study an entire team. We want to study the entire country. But samples are shortcuts, necessary shortcuts, and it's easy to make a mistake with them. It's easy to do sampling wrong. So we're going to look at different techniques to do it correctly. The first method is called simple random sampling, and we'll often write this as SRS, simple random sampling. Here's the idea. Imagine you have Billy, Jamie, Sue, Barney, Jack, Mary, Andrew, John, Nitro, Christina, Jeremy, and Meredith, and we need to randomly choose some of them. How do we do it fairly? Well, you could put all of their names into a big hat and take a simple random sample by drawing names out of the hat. So let's say we draw a random name such as Billy. And then we draw another random name such as John. And another random name such as Sue. And so the idea is that you randomly draw as many people as you need and you keep them out so they don't get drawn twice. They just get selected to be in your sample once. However, there's an even faster way to do it than cutting out all their names and putting them in a hat, especially if you have a long list. You could just number them all, such as making Billy 1, Jamie 2, Sue 3, Barney 4, and so forth. If you gave them each a number, your calculator or a computer going to something like random.org is capable of generating random numbers. And so if I were to do that in this situation, let's say I would go to random.org and generate a number from 1 to 12. Here I am on the random.org website, and I'm going to set my min at 1 and my max at 12 since I have 12 people in my list. And I randomly generate it, and I get a 12. I get an 11. I get a 4 and a 9. And so I'm going to use these numbers to select people. So I got a 12, I got a 10, a 4, and a 9. And so those are the people that I selected for my sample, and I keep doing this until I get however many people I wanted. If I wanted to select 5 people randomly, I would generate 5 numbers. If I got a repeat, I would just keep going and try it again until I got 5 different people. And that's how you generate a completely simple random sample. Moving on to some other techniques, a common one is called a stratified random sample. Imagine that you have a population where you have a small number of certain types of people. In this case, we're doing a study on hair, and we have a small number of people who have no hair at all in the study. And we want to make sure that they don't get overrepresented or underrepresented. For example, let's imagine that we randomly select people from this group, and we end up selecting this person, this person, this person, and this person. Well, if we did that, our random study has 2 out of the 4 people who have no hair, and this is a study on hair. Something like that might really mess with your results, and so you don't want that. Now, you also might run into the issue where you randomly select 4 people and you ended up selecting these 4 people. And here it looks like you got a good balance of guys and girls. That's all great, except you completely excluded people who have no hair. Now, they're going to have a very different opinion on these questions about hair than the general population. You still want them to count, just not count too much, not count more than they're supposed to. And so the idea of a stratified random sample is to break everything down into groups and make sure that everyone gets their fair share. So imagine that in this group, if you were going to select a total of 7 people, you might randomly select 3 of the females. And so you do the females first, and you do it randomly. You randomly choose 3 of the males. And because the people with no hair is a small group, you randomly select 1 of those. And so now you have a group that truly represents the bigger population because you made sure that you had the right numbers of each type. You might be wondering, well, okay, so I'm trying to select my 3 females. How do I do that? Well, to do that, we just do it the same way that you do a simple random sample. Another example is if you're choosing from grade levels at a school. If your population was the entire high school, your stratified random sample might be taking a few 9th graders, a few 10th graders, a few 11th graders, and a few 12th graders. To choose your number of 9th graders, you would just have to do a simple random sample amongst only 9th graders, and then do a new simple random sample amongst only 10th graders, and so on. Another technique is systematic sampling. For that, imagine that you were walking out of a grocery store next Tuesday afternoon and you needed to collect a random sample of about 50 people. How would you do it? One way that's a really strong method is a systematic sample, and that's where you take every, let's say, 5th person who walks in the store. The basic technique goes like this. Estimate the size of the entire population. If you expect 1,000 people to walk into the store on Tuesday, then your population would be 1,000 people. So you expect 1,000 people to walk by. Decide how many people you need to sample. So let's say you need to sample 100 people to do your study. So you want to talk to 100 different people. And then step 3, you divide those numbers. So if I need 1,000 people, or if I have 1,000 people and I only need 100, and I divide them, throw those in my calculator or do that in my head, I get 10, which means that I talk to every 10th person. So at the door, I talk to someone, I let 9 people walk by, and then I talk to the 10th one that comes by after that and repeat. Another method is cluster sampling. Imagine that you have equally sized groups or clusters. You might have something that looks like this. You have all these groups already formed. If you have that, to do a cluster sample, would be randomly choosing one or two of the clusters. So let's say we randomly selected this and we randomly selected this one. So all of the people in this group and all of the people in this group would be your clusters. You can imagine lunch tables in a cafeteria. If everyone was randomly mixed up into lunch tables, then you could pick any two random tables and get a good mix of people. Now, in reality, people tend to sit with their friends, so it doesn't work quite as well. And that's one of the things about cluster sampling. If you're going to use that method, you have to make sure that the groups are truly well mixed. If you have a group like this where it looks like it's mostly red dots, these are mostly purple dots, things like that, or like lunch tables where people are not well mixed, it's not going to work. Last one is a especially bad technique, and that's called a convenience sample. That would be something like going online and finding your Facebook friends, or going and asking people who sit with you at lunch. It's people that are really easy to get to. If I needed to do a study in class and I wanted to have convenience or be lazy, I would just ask the people who were sitting next to me. Is that a random sampling of the room? Absolutely not. And so that's why you have to be careful that you don't do a convenience sample, because it's not a true random sample. And those are 5 key techniques in how we do sampling.